It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and here to talk to us about Catholic traditions and treasures and the illustrated encyclopedia that she put together is Dr. Helen Hoffner. Thanks for being here, Dr. Hoffner.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
When we're talking about traditions and treasures, how would you describe those?
Traditions are the things that are passed on to you from your parents and grandparents that really kind of give a sense to your culture. And the treasures I look at as religious artifacts, a rosary handed down by your parents, maybe a grandfather's missal. Those religious articles have become part of the home.
How has the Catholic Church's history of traditions and treasures, how would that be different from other religions?
I think one thing is that the Catholic Church certainly has a long history of, particularly in the arts, and many beautiful paintings, and if you just look at the Vatican and sculptures and so forth. I think it's interesting for me to look at various paintings, such as there's one known as Madonna Statues, which really the artist never even intended to paint as an image of Mary. But the artist had a certainly different idea in mind, and other people thought it reminded them of Mary. So I think it's interesting to look at kind of the way the Catholic traditions have evolved that way.
And with all of the traditions and treasures that there are, how did you narrow down what to include in the book?
It was maybe the most difficult part. I got the idea to write the book when, after my mother and I wrote a book called The Rosary Collector's Guide, that it kind of explained variations of the rosary. And we would exhibit our rosary collection at schools and churches and shrines, and people would come to the exhibits and get into conversation. And they'd always start telling us about maybe their rosary that their grandparents had or medals in the family, and then they would branch off into traditions like May processions and Corpus Christi processions. So it was really those conversations that motivated me to write the book, and then kind of taking what were the main questions that people had when they came to the rosary exhibits and basing the book on questions that people had.
And so then you evolved this into all of these different Catholic churches. What was the research process for it?
I'm fortunate. I live in the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area, and we have St. Charles Seminary that has wonderful archives and library resources that are open to the public. And I'm a professor at Holy Family University, so the library staff here was very helpful to me, gathering resources that way. And then also a lot of traveling around the country to kind of gather different traditions. Yeah?
Like what were some of the things that you had to travel for?
When I was in San Antonio, Texas, kind of visiting the mission churches, that was interesting. And even I happened to be in the Alamo, and they have a rosary that was found in all of the work that was done excavating at the Alamo. I think one of the fun ones was the tradition of chalking the doors at the Epiphany. That one was new to me, and hearing other people talk about how important it was to them was really interesting.
Yeah, how many of these traditions were you familiar with before you started putting the book together, and how many of them were things that you learned about as you were putting it together?
Most of them I knew about growing up. I think the two that really struck out to me, just now when we were talking about traveling, when I was in San Antonio, I visited many of the flea markets and the outdoor markets, and there were many brides there picking out their wedding rosary. And among some cultures, instead of having a 5-decade rosary, they have a rosary that branches out into 2, and it's used during the ceremonies. And that's something you see in areas of Texas that you don't see in the eastern part of the country where I live.
And then I imagine there's some that you had heard of and were familiar with, but maybe when digging into it, you realized something that you didn't know?
Yeah, I think the one that kind of jumps out that's popular now is the burying of the St. Joseph statue.
Right.
And, people laugh about it, and it's kind of a lighthearted situation. The more I researched it was that actually one of the early saints, St. Andre Bessette in Canada, buried medals and prayed to have land for his congregation. And St. Teresa buried medals. And it really all came from the notion that St. Joseph, in dire statements, found safe shelter for Mary and Joseph. He's the one found on the manger on Christmas Eve, took them into Egypt when they were threatened. So we can laugh and have fun with the St. Joseph statues. It's nice to have those traditions, but there's also some serious history behind it.
Yeah, and a lot of these, some of them are very basic and talking about priests and bishops, popes, and onto medals and scapulars and things like that. But you tend to find different historical facts and things that are interesting that even Catholics that grew up with these things might not know those. What are some other examples of things that people could learn from the book?
I think the fun fact that, like you said, maybe the cradle Catholics don't know, is the notion of becoming Pope. We always think about, well, the Pope is elected from the College of Cardinals.
Mm-hmm.
Technically, any baptized male can become Pope.
Mm-hmm.
And it's highly unlikely, but and since the 1300s, every Pope has come from the Cardinals. But the notion that any man who's Catholic, baptized, can become Pope, I think that's kind of a fun trivia fact.
Yeah. We're talking with Dr. Helen Hoffner. She wrote Catholic Traditions and Treasures, an illustrated encyclopedia. It's a full-color hardback book. It really looks nice, and it's got a lot of great information in there. And one of the dedications of the book is to the unknown artists and craftsmen of the church's history. Why did you want to dedicate the book to them?
Well, so many of our traditions are rooted in various artwork, such as the paintings and so forth. And we know the big names, but there are just so many other artists who will never really know the true story of who actually painted it. And there's many paintings where we think we know the artist, but maybe we don't really have the truth. So you want to give a little recognition to maybe the people whose names aren't as prominent as they should be.
Did you run into very many of them when researching the book?
There were times where I wanted to really go back and make sure, now, is this actually the person who should get credit, or was there someone else? There were a lot of situations like that, but I wanted to really double-check and triple-check my research.
So, of all of these traditions and treasures that you document, how do they help us to deepen our faith?
They take us to a link that, when we're having times of trouble, to know that our parents and grandparents went through these situations, where some people would think that the rosary is repetitious. I've heard non-Catholics say, oh, you're just repeating the same thing mindlessly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, sometimes, like you say, in times of trouble, when you're having an extremely stressful situation, you need that comfort of a repetition that you can go to. That when you're saying the prayers of the rosary, it actually is calming you down. In fact, Pope Francis, maybe some people remember a year or two ago, Pope Francis actually, in one of his addresses, he mentioned that praying the rosary has scientifically been proven to lower your blood pressure, and it's actually good for your heart.
Huh.
And one audience, he gave out little rosaries in boxes that look like pill boxes to say how the rosary is good for your heart.
Huh. So with that, would you say that these traditions and treasures are helpful or necessary?
I think both. Just like you could say medicine is necessary.
Uh-huh.
They're really necessary to kind of give us that reminder.
Do you think that there's any way that they could be harmful?
Well, there's, in anything in life you can use things the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
There's always the people who say, oh, you're praying to a statue. But it's just a reminder. It's the same thing as having a picture of family members in your house as a reminder of them. We don't pray to family photographs, they're reminders. So if we have statues and holy cards in our house, we're not praying to an image. It's a reminder that Mary's with us, that the saints can help us.
Mm-hmm. So how did finding out more about these different traditions impact your faith?
It really deepened my faith in terms of, there were things that I did growing up, like the May processions and the holy water fonts, and you did it just because your parents taught you to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But now I think I understand it more as an adult, understanding the meaning behind it. So it absolutely, now when I pass a holy water font or something, I think about the ancient fonts in the temples. It was actually meant as a way of cleansing before prayer. Or I think the one that always reminds me is the Madonna statues. There's many houses in the United States will have a statue of Mary on the front lawn.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times they have the arch over it. And it's just a common thing to say, like, oh, there's a Catholic house with the Mary statue. As I was researching, I found out people actually call them bathtub Madonnas.
Right.
Because the earliest ones were actually made with the old-fashioned bathtub that sort of had the curve arch to it.
Uh-huh.
And I never knew that what they were intended for in the beginning was replicating the grotto at Lourdes, where we always see the image of St. Bernadette praying, and that actually in 1896, they built one at Notre Dame University that actually has stones from the Lourdes grotto they sent stones from Lourdes Grotto to put in the grotto at Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, in years past, I would drive past them and think, oh, that's a nice statue. But now I can link them to Lourdes and St. Bernadette.
So did you go into your bathroom and rip out your tub and set up a shrine in your yard?
I have a shrine in my yard. Just a statue like many people have.
Uh-huh. But not with a tub?
Not with a tub. And it's funny, I live in an old house where years ago we took out an old tub that would have been a perfect shrine if I'd only known back then.
If you only kept it.
Yeah.
Well, has there been any devotions or any, like you talk about different medals and things like that, is there anything that you've kind of adopted into your routine now since putting the book together?
The Divine Mercy Chaplet. That's one that just really struck me, that I have made it a practice of trying to do it every day at 3 o'clock. Sometimes I can't always hit 3 o'clock, but that's one that since I've done the research, I've made part of my daily routine.
Well, and that one I feel is, there's a lot of people that pray the Divine Mercy, but a lot of these I think are a little bit more obscure, and I think you're kind of calling attention to some of these things that might otherwise have been lost with generations, not necessarily passing them down. So I think this is a really neat opportunity for people to learn about the treasures and traditions of the Catholic faith, and to help keep these things alive and to keep spreading them, and so that we can learn about them as well. So this will be a great resource. It looks great, and it's got a lot of information. And it's not way too much information. It's just nice, short stories about a lot of different things. So where can people get a copy of it?
The easiest place is to go to the website for Sophia Institute Press. If people don't have the exact website, if they just kind of enter Sophia Institute Press, they would get to it quickly. But it's also at major booksellers such as Barnes & Noble and Amazon and the Catholic Company, where people would normally go to find books.
Sure. All right. Again, it's called Catholic Traditions and Treasures, an Illustrated Encyclopedia. We've been talking with the author of it, Dr. Helen Hoffner. Thanks for being here today and taking some time out of your schedule to share it with us.
Oh, thank you. It's been my pleasure.